Welcome to today's episode of the Family Tree Magazine podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of genealogy and uncover the tools and the strategies that help you trace your family history. I'm your host, Lisa Louise Cook. And today I am so happy to be welcoming Andrew Koch, the editor of Family Tree Magazine, back to the show. This time around, he's going to help us out with targeting our research state by state across America. Welcome back to the podcast, Andrew.
Thanks, Lisa. It's really good to see you.
Great to see you too. Hey, I know over the years you have been really busy crafting research guides for all 50 US states, plus Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. And you've been including 2 guides in each issue of Family Tree Magazine. And now I see that you have this great feature article in the July 2025 issue of the magazine. It's called America the Beautiful, and it's a guide to US genealogy. So how do the guides that you've been publishing and this article kind of work together to help us with our genealogy research here in the United States?
Well, it struck me as I was editing all of these guides and writing a handful of them as well, that researching in the different US states can sometimes feel a little bit like researching in different countries. That the histories, there's a common history, of course, but some of the nuances are so different, that settlement patterns, dates of statehood, and in particular, when states began keeping vital records, all of that can make it kind of tough to research in a new to use state. So as we were completing this most recent guide, or this most recent cycle of the state guides, I thought, why don't we put together an article that kind of stitches up some of the advice from all of the guides, summarizes it, and helps walk you through how to research in a new to use state. You know, I live in Ohio, as did 6 generations of my mother's family, but I also have relatives across the river in Kentucky. We have relatives in Virginia. We have immigrants who came in through New York. And so as I research these lines, it's really important for me to know more about the vital record adoption dates, the state censuses, the land keeping policies, some of these more far-flung states that I'm not as familiar with.
Right. And I love, like you said, the article kind of gives you the overview of what you're looking for. And then the guides, you can dig in and go state by state. And I know that we all know that it does help to know the history of a country. And you got to begin your research there. And the United States, like you said, is no exception. So how about you give us a quick little American history lesson to get us started?
I'll do my best. Kind of very broad strokes, and that's what I tried to do in the article. American history for genealogists, if you will. One important thing to think about is we're often taught U.S. history as beginning east and moving west, as colonists settled, hopped on riverboats, took the Oregon Trail, but there are a lot of complicating factors there, and as you're researching individual communities, it can be really helpful to know that. For one thing, of course, there were indigenous groups in the United States thousands of years before European contact, before European settlement. But even after 1492, saw not just English settlers in Virginia and New England, but Spanish settlers in what's now the American Southwest and in Florida. Both of those, if not predating, then really kind of co-terminus with the founding of Jamestown. You also have the French in the interior along the Mississippi River and the Ohio River valleys, and even New Sweden, which was part of a short-lived, but in what is now Delaware. So you have all those different colonial powers in the area. So it really complicates that narrative of beginning east and moving west. And other factors that you really want to consider are geography, economic opportunities. For example, the states of California and Oregon were admitted to the Union quite a bit before their neighbors because of what was going on in the area at the time. So California had the gold rush. In Oregon, you had the highly coveted Oregon country, Willamette Valley, that drew settlers and Americans there before, say, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado. And that's the kind of thing that these state guides get into, is what are the key years associated with each place, given that it wasn't a totally uniform pattern of migration.
Being able to study the migration patterns and understand how some were colonies, some were territories, boundaries are changing all the time.
Yep.
All of those things. course, some of the first records that we want to look for are vital records, births, marriages, and deaths. So, what do you think are the most important things that we really need to understand about US vital records?
Like in some other countries where the vital record keeping system is really centralized, kept by the national level government, that task has been left to the individual states. So you end up with this sort of patchwork of vital record adoption laws that affect what records were kept in the first place and then also what you can access today. So that coverage will vary because the different states have different rules. So, for example, states in New England are famous for keeping vital records very early, from the 1600s, with the caveat that they were kept at the town level, whereas most states ended up keeping them at the county and then at the state level. By comparison, some places in the American Southwest didn't mandate vital record registration until the 1920s, and even then, there was a lag. It took a while for um, that to be universally enforced, all the counties to participate. So I like to think about three dates that you want to keep in mind when looking at birth, marriage, and death records that were kept by civil authorities in the US. The date that the records were first kept in that area, usually by the county first, and then the state as those laws came into effect. The date of your ancestor's event, of course, when did the thing that you're hoping to see documented happen? And then third, the date that's relevant to privacy restrictions. A lot of state governments have rules about who's allowed to access vital records within a certain privacy window. So, for example, you might have a state where birth records are restricted for 100 years until the custody turns over to the state archives, and then anyone can request them. But the dates for marriage and death records might be more like 50 years. And that's a constantly moving target as state legislatures change those policies, as new records are becoming available. So it is kind of a very localized thing. You have to be keeping in touch with what's going on, not just historically, but also today.
Yeah. And I know it can be really surprising, I think, to people who are new to genealogy to realize many of these vital records, particularly the births and the deaths, don't go back that far, really. And you have to make that shift probably into more church records, more local records. Amazingly, I don't have any New England ancestors that I have ever come across. So it was news to me that town level retention, of records, that's really interesting. So important to know where you're researching and what's guiding them. And certainly the guides do that. One record set that really consistently goes back a lot farther, thankfully, is the US federal census.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's not as widely known that there are state censuses out there. So, how about you give us an overview of both types of census and how they can work together to maybe help fill in the gaps, particularly for other records that are not available?
Yeah, census records, I think, are the first destination for a lot of genealogists because of that consistency. Every 10 years from 1790 really to the present, there's been this enumeration that's been taken. I'm sure our listeners have been in and out of census records for a long time. I'm not probably sharing any new information here, but as new record sets are made available after 72 years, we get access to these great new resources. The 1950 census is the most recent available as of our conversation now. That was released just a few years ago. And the questions that are asked in each census vary, of course, generally going from less informative, at least from a genealogical perspective, to more informative. It's striking when you go back and look at these older census records. They are not even naming every person in the household. It's the head of the household and then little check marks to indicate anyone else. So
Right.
it's very bare bones as far as that goes. And those early census records can really be hit or miss. So it's fortunate then, and this is to pivot to the state censuses, that a lot of places kept their own enumerations sort of separate from that schedule. A lot of states, for example, took censuses every 10 years on the fives, 1885, 1895, to give a snapshot of the population in the years between those census years. And again, that's a state by state thing. As far as I know, for example, in Ohio, in my home state of Ohio, we haven't taken any state censuses, but the coverage is so much better in other places, and those collections are often digitized and indexed because they're so valuable.
Yeah, and there again, if you kind of know the history of the state, you get a sense of why particular state censuses were taken and when they were taken, because they were changing and they had to evaluate their population to be able to grow and to make decisions for their own state. So
Yeah,
I love that it's, like you said, on the fives. When you find one, it's neat. It falls right in between that US federal census, which is really nice.
yeah, and it can be a useful substitute too if you're missing if your family wasn't in the U.S. Census for some reason, or in the case of the 1890 census, where most records have been lost. If a state took an enumeration in 1885, 1895, that's great. There you go. It's not a perfect substitute, but certainly gives you a lot more to look at than maybe otherwise.
And your state guides that you have published in the magazine, those are going to tell us state by state which ones there were, what years, and hopefully maybe how to access them.
Yes. Yep. Because it's a little less uniform. The U.S. censuses are available widely at the genealogy websites and often for free. The state censuses, it's less consistent. Sometimes they're usually held by a state archive, but whether the archive has its own database or it's in partnership with an Ancestry.com, a MyHeritage, to make that available, yeah, our guides will point you in the right direction there.
Fantastic. Now, I think some of the most interesting records are land records, and you cover those in the article as well, which I think is wonderful, right?
hmm Yeah, and I'll admit I'm no expert on land records, and I think that's representative of how intimidating they are for some researchers. They're not usually as available, they're often not indexed, but if you can find them, they really can provide a lot of information about your ancestor, about their family, and about what was going on in their community. In the article, I talk about how there are essentially two categories of states, if you will, and which camp your state of interest falls into will affect what kind of record you should be looking for. So there are public land states, that is, states in which the federal government owned the land and sold it off to eligible recipients. So homesteaders, veterans who were eligible for bounty land, that kind of thing. The other camp are state land states, where that's the individual state government fulfilling that role. And I break this out in the article, but there are 30 public land states and 20 state land states. And I find it easier to remember the state land states because those are the 13 original colonies, the handful of states that split off from them: Kentucky, Tennessee, Maine, and West Virginia, and then that were annexed, that were once independent republics. So Hawaii and Texas. California is the exception. That was once an independent republic, but it's a public land state. The Mississippi River is kind of a helpful dividing line, too. Most states to the west of it are public land, and most states to the east are state land. And if you're in a public land state, you're going to be looking to federal repositories to find those land patents and other records of that transaction. In the state, at the state level, or for the state land states, that's often a state archive or a state land office.
Well, and these guys are really, actually, the article is really, I think, the best place for somebody who would really finally like to dip their toe into the land records. Start there because that's going to give you a great starting point. So, Andrew, close us out with kind of a rundown of what the resources are that you have available for our listeners and how they can find them.
Yeah, if you're subscribed to Family Tree Magazine, you'll receive in your inbox, either your in-person real inbox or your email inbox, two of these research guides each issue. So the July-August issue restarts the cycle with Ohio and California, and we're on about a 4.5-year cycle there. So if you are a subscriber for that amount of time, you'll get all of the research guides that way. But we do also offer them in our shop. You can buy individual guides as digital downloads. You can buy a bundle of the guides, either in a digital format or, and this is new this summer, we're releasing the state guides as a 2-volume book set. So if that's something of interest to you, you have that option available as well. And then we also do make the guides available on our website for free, although you're unable to download them, the free versions there. So we consistently hear from our readers that these are one of the more valuable um, things in the magazine. So we really want to keep that going and make those resources available. If you're ever curious and you're looking at the magazine, on page 41, we have a calendar that spells out when the guide for that state most recently appeared in the magazine, and then a little look ahead, what states are going to be covered in the next few issues of the magazine.
Well, we'll have links in the show notes for this podcast episode so everybody can get to the website and find all these resources that you're talking about. Wonderful way to really dig into our U.S. genealogical records. Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming by the podcast and sharing your expertise.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Family Tree Magazine podcast. This is the show from America's #1 genealogy magazine. I'll have links to everything that we've talked about today on the show over at the show notes page. And you can find that at familytreemagazine.com/podcast. And there you'll also find a huge back catalog of past episodes full of topics that are going to help you in your genealogy research. And when you stop by the website, be sure to sign up for our free newsletter. That really is the perfect way to stay in touch with Family Tree Magazine and get all the latest and greatest news, plus the announcements of each and every new podcast episode. I'm Lisa Louise Cook, and I hope that you'll come by and visit me at my website, genealogygems.com. And there you will find the Genealogy Gems podcast and a link over to our Genealogy Gems YouTube channel. So until next time, have fun climbing your family tree.